This is the Superpowered Mind podcast for inquiring individuals who are tired of the struggle for peace, happiness, and clarity. I'm Claire Diamond, ready to help you explore the principles of the mind, the self, and reality to unlock ultimate mental freedom. This podcast is the one to listen to if you're ready to experience the capabilities of the superpowered mind. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our podcast. And today we're looking at identity, which we always look at in some way or another. But today specifically in relation to gender identity, because our exploration is entirely about that version of ourselves that is held psychologically, that represents what we are. And we're continually exploring how that version, which is never true, is only ever a psychological concept, how that version, which is the product of an enormous belief system, how it obscures what is really going on, what we really are. And as a result of that obscurity, creates behaviors and confusions, conflict, withdrawal that really hinder the experience of being in the world, the experience of existence and of what is possible. So today we're considering, is gender identity different from that? And this is a very important question, especially for anyone who is working in mental health, who is working in education or leadership in some way, responsible for other people's safety, their mental health, their physical well-being, parents, and anyone who has some form of accountability and responsibility for other people and for their development, their safety, their well-being. And we have to ask the really big questions about what is going on, because there has been a societal wave which has made it very difficult for these questions to be asked. And in fact, there are court cases ongoing at the moment in which any challenge to the belief system around this is criminalised. So it's a courageous act to question what is really happening with identity. And it is the responsibility of all of us in some way or another to ask these questions. So first of all, let's begin with, what is identity? So identity is the culmination of a belief system of what I am, resulting in that letter I. And that letter I, which seems so innocuous, so tiny, but in fact, it becomes the holding place for every single belief in what I am. And because it looks absolutely real, that letter I and everything it contains has to be protected. Otherwise, it looks as though I will die. It looks as though I will be annihilated. And so when anything contained in that letter I is confronted or challenged, the behavior that is triggered around that will be either to go into fight, into conflict, aggressively trying to defend everything that is represented, or to withdraw, to hide away, to go into protection, to disappear really in order to safeguard those beliefs from being triggered or exposed. And so all behavior, when the I is in operation, is geared around protecting that I. And we see it in ourselves, don't we? We see it all the time when there's a lot of self-consciousness happening, when there's a real sense of being under threat, of our identity being dismissed or rejected. We can see the behaviors that result from that. And the reality that is resulting from that, how it looks like everyone's against us, how in comparison to other people we're failing, how our future looks so bleak, how our past was so full of regret or so full of issues that have created what we are now. So our whole personality, our whole sense of being is contained in this moment, and it looks to be vulnerable and under threat. And so that creates a series of behaviors that only really reconfirm that whole belief system. So there's this cycle going on in which this unquestioned sense of what I am has to be defended. And when it's under threat, it creates more solidity in that identity that has to be defended even more. And we call this the re-traumatization cycle. It just goes on and on and on. But what happens in these conversations is that that entire existence is questioned. Every element of question is questioned, and stress and threats to that identity start to be seen no longer as confirmation of survival threat, but moments of invitation for the mind to genuinely explore what it's creating, what is going on. So that's the identity, and it's something for us to consider in every single aspect of life, and particularly those aspects of life where there is fear, need, shame, insecurity, when there is a real sense of separation between me and the external world, where there is emotions that look uncontainable, that have to be managed and controlled somehow. And to see that, for the mind to start to see that, is for the end of that ongoing hamster wheel of trying to find some form of peace or security or freedom. This is really a mind settling into what is going on. And so now in comes gender identity, which has taken the world by storm, which is impacting institutions and laws and organizations to such an extent that in many ways the whole of society is organizing no longer around sex, male or female, but around a belief system of what I am. So I might be born male, but my belief system says I'm female, and therefore I now have the right to be treated as female. And the question for us really now is this a different setup? Is this a different form of occurrence than the identity that we're looking at in our courses and our conversations? And my suggestion for us all to consider is that not only is it not different, but it is the furthest possible, probably the furthest possible, most extreme example of the identity's activity. And as such, organizing society and laws and changing rights, changing sports, changing facilities, medicating, having surgical operations around this form of identity is really as far removed from the reality of what we are as it's possible for society to get. And as such, it is enormously problematic for all of us for so many reasons. And I think it was really worth looking at a few of them today. So the first thing for us to consider is that gender identity seeks to trump biological sex, biological reality, in two ways. Firstly, as simply as an agreement. If I say that I am a man, then I'm a man, and therefore, regardless of the physical, I should have access to all male spaces. You need to treat me as though I'm a man. You need to refer to me as though I'm a man. And so the biological reality that you have for me has to be overridden. And we know that babies as young as 3 weeks old can distinguish between male and female. There are vast, vast differences between male and female bodies at every cell level. And so I am telling you that because my belief system, it might not even be my belief system. I might not really believe that I'm a man. But even if I do, or even if I don't, I can say I'm a man. And therefore you have to believe that about me. So this power that I now have, enforced in many courts, in many laws, in many countries now, is that you have to believe this about me. And my existence now, I'm telling you, I'm telling myself, I'm telling society, depends on you having this certain view of me in your mind. And that is the fundamental issue with all identity, is that this attempt to control the version of me that exists in someone else's mind, which is impossible. First of all, it's impossible. And second of all, there is no securing of myself in that version. There's no securing of existence that is possible by dictating or influencing or law enforcing a version of myself in someone else's mind. Whatever we try to do that with the identity, we are in deep trouble. It's a setup that is literally impossible to make happen, to enforce. So what's created is dishonesty, people lying about what they believe other people to be, and laws are forcing people to lie because it's just not possible to change that version of how I hold myself to be in someone else's head. So not only is it happening at that level, it's happening at the physical level in which the body, poor body that tries so hard to deal with whatever the mind is creating, these bodies are being forced down a route for kids, through puberty blockers, for adults, cross-sex hormones, for both children and adults, surgeries, to try to turn the body into something that now matches what the mind is saying. And the issue, and there's lots of comparisons to plastic surgery, but the issue is that it's just not possible to do it. So with plastic surgery, I could say I want a different nose, for example. I could get a different nose through plastic surgery. I could get bigger boobs. I could get neck sorted out, facelift. I could get what I'm asking for. It's possible. It's an achievable one. But with changing the sex of a body, it's not possible. It's just, no matter how many hormones I take, no matter how many operations I have, all that's happening is I am still this is still a female body that now has a beard, for example, that has had its breast removed, that is having a skin tube of my forearm is being taken off to make something that is attempting to resemble a penis. It doesn't make me a man. It does not make the body male. And so this is the enormous problem with trying to force the body to become something that it's not. It's just not possible. And all of these interventions are creating illness. It is too much for the body to deal with. And so there are huge escalations in osteoporosis, in heart failure, in cancers, in dementia, because of these hormones that are so wrong for that sexed body to be taking. So this is the huge issue with trying to do something that is literally impossible. It creates a setup of dishonesty in society, and it is creating enormous issues physically. And none of it is doing what is intended, because what is intended is impossible to achieve. And for that individual whose mind has gone down the route of my survival, which is my psychological survival, my survival as a conceptual entity in the mind, which actually has got nothing to do with actual existence. It's just a mental version of me in the mental landscape that belief system is creating. For that individual, every interaction, because that identity now represents what I am, every interaction will either validate or reject that identity. And so life becomes an attempt to get that identity validated. And so that identity is on this roller coaster of validation, rejection, and that looks like survival. And it's why the trans movement talks a lot about genocide, because it looks like if that identity is not affirmed, it's obliteration. But for all of us, in every aspect, that the identity of what we are being challenged is the best possible thing that could happen, because in that challenge, it becomes clear what I am has got nothing to do with that identity. In fact, the less that identity is focused on, the more there's just this experience of existence, of intelligence in action, of love, of presence, of consciousness, without that constant wrapping round of the mind around this survival of a psychological concept. But when it looks like that is what I am, that is my existence, and my survival depends on that being validated, then all of life is the attempt for that to happen. And that then, of course, creates problems with spaces or sports or refuges or prisons, changing rooms, facilities, crisis centers that are designed to operate on a single sex basis. Because for my identity, my gender identity to be validated, I have to have access to the spaces that are not designed for my biological sex. I have to. Otherwise, it looks like I'm being persecuted or destroyed. And so, there's a case going on at the moment in Scotland in which a male doctor identifying as a woman insisted on using the female nurse's changing room. And of course, that has to happen if the gender identity is going to trump biological sex. And if it's allowed to do that, it is the end, it's literally the end of any single sex spaces, which is more problematic for women than it is for men, because these spaces, particularly for women, have been created because, for example, in sport, the female body has many, many, many physical differences from men that mean it's just not fair for women and men to compete as though it's all women when there might be trans-identified men in those sports. Places like prisons, where almost the entire female prison population has been sexually abused in some way. It is vital for single-sex provisions to be in place. So allowing gender identity to trump biological reality is a problem not just for that individual who will suffer because the mind is completely at odds from the body, and the body is reality, the mind is not. But it is a problem for society as a whole, if it tries to organize itself around a belief system that is in direct conflict with physical, biological reality. Organizing around a belief system that can change, that is trying to enforce itself in other people's minds, that is trying to override existing safeguarding practices, is really profoundly dangerous for society. And in a conversation like ours, which is entirely about what is real, we cannot go down this route just because we're told it's kind, we're told it's empathetic. It's not kind or empathetic to falsely affirm something that is not real. It's not kind to lie. It's not kind to say, well, I don't mind sharing a changing room with a man, say, and therefore on that basis, every single woman should be subjected to that same issue. It's kind to be truthful. It's kind for ourselves to ensure that every interaction is a revelation of reality, a shift back to what is actually true rather than what is being believed or thought about or imagined. We can see how over time society has been increasingly focusing in on that identity of separation, how commercialized it has become, how the entire mental health industry is focused in on securing that identity. And we can see how a gender identity, which is directly at odds with the physical, biological reality, and which seeks to secure itself within legislation, within the policies of every organization, is the furthest extreme of what can happen when identity is the focus. And everything that we're doing in this conversation is reeling that back. It is saying the identity can never be secured. It is never true. It is never anything other than a psychological concept. And all of life, every interaction, every conversation is a revelation of that fact. The more clear that becomes, the more the human mind is in reality, the more peaceful it is, the more open it is, the more curious it is, the more connected it is, the more sane it is. And it's our responsibility, all of us, parents, teachers, mental health workers, coaches, employers, to recognize that fact. It's for the good of all of us. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Superpowered Mind with me, Claire Diamond. If you want extra support in the exploration of your mind, download our exclusive subliminal recording, especially for podcast listeners, on bit.ly/podcast subliminal.